Doug and Paula, starting a little late today because we got started late, but we've been talking, Doug and I were talking off air about uh, mathematics and what makes it concrete and tangible, and then Paula came along and 2 plus 1 equals 3. We realized that made a lot more tangible, and we thought let's start the conversation for those who are viewing at home. Probably not that long because it's not one of these ones where there's 10 people and each one has a million things to say. But for those who are here, hopefully it'll be nice and concrete. So, Paula, what brought you to us today? How are things going, and what's on your plan?
What's news in your world?
Yeah, that's me.
Well, I lost a plane today, so that's why I'm here.
What happened?
I lost my plane to Monterey today,
Oh,
so that's why I'm here.
I thought you were going somewhere. I thought there was a posting I saw that was something about you going to some conference or event, right?
Yeah, I have been traveling, but yeah, I have been working a lot with this idea of citizen labs, and and I was going to present a project about libraries as labs. So, but I lost my plane, so someone else is going to present.
Oh, wow. Oh, Monterey. Oh, I'm putting two and two together. Yes, you mean the city of Monterey. I've been there.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about. So, but you're at the whatever Technico de Monterey. So, I was like,
yeah, yeah.
why do you need a plane? You can't just take a bicycle or something. So,
No,
not
2
working.
hours flight. No,
Yeah.
I cannot take a bicycle.
So,
Yeah,
how did the other ones go? I suppose you maybe you developed a slight allergy to airplanes because you were on some long flights to
yeah.
North America. How did
And
that
also,
go?
I have to think that I'm writing an article about emergent pedagogies
Hmm.
for the digital age, and I have to turn it in today. Today's the deadline.
Wow.
So maybe I think that I lost the plane because I need to finish that.
Yeah, someone else can give the presentation, but only you can finish this paper. Wow, emergent pedagogy for the digital age. Well, maybe we can console with you about that. That sounds like in the type of thing that Doug was talking about, like making things concrete for people. So help us. What is an emergent pedagogy?
Yeah, I was trying to characterize all these tendencies and all these concepts that are around on the internet, because I think we need it. We all need it, and I was trying to make a matrix to put them like together in order to classify them.
So what were the axes of the matrix that you envisioned? Have you figured that out yet?
Yeah, well, I'm working trying to figure out how these pedagogies not always relate to the system of knowledge production.
Hmm.
They sometimes are just like I don't know, but that's my hypothesis. I think that maybe not everybody thinks about how these pedagogies are contributing to a dominant system of knowledge production. And
Hmm.
I want to make that difference among those approaches.
Okay, so they don't always relate to the same system of knowledge production, but do you think they relate to always some system of knowledge production, even if it's not the same one?
Well, I was trying to make a difference between those pedagogies that are questioning the system of knowledge production, the actual system of knowledge production, and those uh, which are just replicating or reproducing the system. Because I have this issue with models and approaches that only try to emphasize the use of technology, but they do not have like a critical view of it. So.
Hey, Karen, how are you doing?
Karen.
We're talking right now about hold on, emergent pedagogy through the digital age. And it reminded me of something Doug said when we were offline. Let me see if I can search my mind for it. Well, it reminded me of everything that Doug said, actually, because Doug was saying, go back in the chat, which I've saved here, that the industrial model, which I think relates, Paulo, there's certainly an industrial knowledge production model. He was saying the industrial model emphasizes the data, which I think is also true of a normal pedagogy. So like even if we awesome, I can take a break from taking notes. I'll have my hands up here. You can see them. Nothing up my sleeve. Um, oh, there's a bottle cap. Okay. Sorry, I'm not as good. I've been watching Penn and Teller on YouTube. Anyway, uh, so the industrial model he was saying relates to data, and I was agreeing. Like it's all about data, and especially now with big data, it's like, oh, our whole lives are turning into data, data, data everywhere. And I was questioning that in one way, which is very just a minor question, which is like, okay, how about process? Like just like get a little bit of a wedge in there and say, hey, it's not just data. There's also a way of using that, which could raise lots of questions about ethics or like how should you use the data. But I think we kind of got a little sidetracked.
Well, I mean, my whole orientation is this sort of allergic reaction to the industrial forms, and the imprinting of that model and that reality is so profound on every level of how we think and relate to the world. And when you start talking about pedagogies and you start talking about curriculum and you start talking about all of that and learning, it is all centered not on the learner. It's always centered on the subject to be learned and amassing more of that, and generating more, referencing what came before so that you are defensible and and you fit the academic meets industrial model Hoyle of credential and credibility and authority. It's all based on racking up content, data, information, knowledge, amalgamations, and nowhere in any of that is the human being that might or might not find value in it, might or might not be able to apply it, might or might not even need it. um, it becomes something for its in service to itself, and the human experiential part of that got left out, got lost in the sauce a long time ago. And I'm beginning to, look at the world through, first and foremost, a human being-centered experiential filter that says, how am I experiencing this? What is the pull that has me interested in learning, ... fill in the blank. And so much of the, quote, innovation, leading edge, new forms and blended learning and flipped classrooms and ed tech and on 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 is just playing with instrumentality and technology applied to old forms. The underlying curriculum hasn't changed at all. The underlying requirements haven't changed at all. The hamster trail that the learner is supposed to execute on successfully, navigate successfully, hasn't changed at all. And the truth of it is that if you start from the human being as a learner, and that human being does better socially if they're learning with others, because then they can co-teach and co-develop the experience and feed each other's curiosity. You get a whole different emergent thing that's human being experience and centered, and the lens through which you look at all of the instrumentalities for learning and resources and repositories and means and channels becomes, is it facilitative of and in service to the learners in their learning experience? And the only ones that can determine and define that is them, and nobody's asking them. Everybody's cooking this stuff for them, but nobody's like saying, "Does this help you?"
So let me jump in with a quick one, which is the examples we were talking about were had to do with adult. Before we started the recording was about adult learners. One was the case of Doug, one was Abraham Lincoln, and one was my dad. Three completely randomly selected
Yeah.
people, just by chance.
What a sample.
Those were the ones we
And the
picked.
subject we were talking about was math.
Yeah.
Like, what I challenged Joe on was math is like, STEM, and STEM is sort of hardcore. And the big premise, the asserted premise is if you're dealing with a STEM subject, they just have to learn it. Like, there's no reason to inquire into the experience of that, into the immediacy of that, into the power or compelling nature of the learning experience. They just have to learn it and test out and prove their competence and their qualification in it. And I think that's crap. And I gave Joe two examples where I learned math in an applied context. One was about algorithms at Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and the other was in doing, business financial projections, where I built them from scratch from a vision of a company that I had in my head. And it was a language, and I was telling a story, and I was very, very clear about the story I was telling and the ingredients of it and how I was putting that together in the form of a set of financials. And Joe shared his father's experience starting with spreadsheets on the farm and ending up getting into all sorts of higher level stuff. But it's through the lens of this has immediate meaning and contextual relevance to me. And without that, like,
Yeah.
who is it relevant to, why, when, if it's not contextualized and experiential?
So I'm going to read out the thing that Karen put in the chat just because it's worth reading for the record. The chat will go someplace else, but then I'd love to hear Paula's reflections on it. So she said, well, two things now. She's giving me more. So the first one she says here, this makes me think of every time I go to the central aisles in the supermarket where all the sophisticated junk food is, and I think about the people in chemistry and design and marketing who are putting their energies and knowledge into designing a more attractive mac and cheese. Wow. Yeah, PhDs or at least master's degrees in marketing. That's for sure.
That's screaming, "By me!"
Yeah. No, cheesier. So there's that, and then I'm going to put mute and go look for my book. But I can still hear you. So Paula, I wonder if this is at all useful on your paper.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, Karen, you're right. It sounds very very interesting, this book that you're reading. I'm reading the chat.
A cool new tool for helping kids become more aware of the complexity and value of ecosystems. That does sound good. Yeah, that sounds related to your work on the fresh pond, Karen. And here it is. That's an ecosystem right in your neighborhood. You're even part of it. Oh my gosh.
I'm in the library.
This was the book I was telling Doug about. Like, I started reading it in high school. I should probably reread it. It's a really thin one. It's not much longer than Elements of Style we were talking about last week or a couple weeks ago. It's probably 150 pages, so it's twice as long. But this is one. Here, let's see if I can find an example. Ooh. Yeah. Here, this is a great quote, random quote. You may endeavor to incite interest by means of birch rods, or you may coax it by the incitement of pleasurable activity. But without interest, there will be no progress. So there you go, a little two-sentence quote from Alfred North Whitehead.
And so, if there was if there was a metric, if there was a criteria, filter against which a new filter against which you were to sort of define the matrices of your quadrant, right, of your pedagogical quadrant, through a human lens, and I'm in the middle of doing this in the context of um, of the meme of transformation in the context of business, right? So um, where we ended up was on the subjective side of it. One end of the matrix is the me or I, and the other end of the matrix is we or us as a community or collective or team. So like that's one sort of vector. Um, because some things are directed toward the individual and the individual experience, and some things are definitionally directed toward group or collective endeavor and collaborative endeavor. Um, and and then the other axis for us was, is it human mediated predominantly, or is it technology mediated predominantly? So does the technology sort of do the heavy lifting, but it's again facilitative because the lens we're looking at it through is in service to the human experience within this context, and I think it's sort of a generalizable, universalizable kind of thing. But is the technology sort of doing the heavy lifting, or is the human being really doing the heavy lifting in terms of whatever the it is, whatever the activity or endeavor or learning is, or production activity is? And it took us, I don't know, it probably took us 20 hours to get to those two axes. I mean, it was really because we kept getting pulled to industrial dualities. Like there are all these dualities that are just cast and written in stone and imprinted on our genetic level that are how we relate to the world. It's like, and unlearning those and trying to get clear of them is really tough.
So I want to comment on some things. I don't know if this is going to fall into the stereotyped traditional way, but I thought it was quite nice, and it reminds me a bit of what you were suggesting, Doug. So I'm going to start screen sharing, and I don't want to lose track of what Karen's saying in the chat. I don't know if you're talking about the one I put on Google Plus, but there was the interesting one on Google Plus, which was today, like, look at 30 students in America. Like, here's the stats. Like, that's the one. Yeah. So like. Yeah, it's shocking because like we were all in that classroom or something similar to that classroom. Mexico City, I don't know how it is for kids growing up there. Probably a lot of it's a lot better actually because the US is crazy. But let me show you the screen share, which is another thing. So this is from Steve, and Steve, he has another co-author also named Steve. And now he's an economist. So this is his model. It's like a public thing, so it's completely fair to share this. This one doesn't even talk about the energy world so much. So on the left, he's talking about potential profitability. Could be low, like Wikipedia. How are you ever going to make money off of Wikipedia? Or Peeragogy. Come on, guys. Can we make a dollar? No. Or a profitability could be high, like Stanford or University of Phoenix or something. So that's the left example. And then there's the social benefits of coordination. So it could be high, like again, Stanford or Wikipedia. Both of them benefit from coordination. But I guess Wikipedia would be a bit lower because it doesn't need to be like that coordinated. Like this could be Wikimedia Foundation here, and this would be the actual wiki itself, like a bit of coordination, but not a whole lot. So it's medium. And then over here, you have other things like high profitability but low coordination, like, I don't know, Coke versus Pepsi. They've got something in common. And then here's low, like not much profitability as yet, just your random startup, but they don't really want to talk to anyone else either. So I thought this was really brilliant. Maybe you would erase profitability, Paula, but like the social benefits of coordination seems like a really useful axis for stuff we're talking about. Like if it's just you and like look, I gotta bust through this thing, I gotta study it at nights and weekends, then it's just you're over here. You don't really need to talk to anyone else. But if it's like something else where you don't have all the answers, you don't know, or like Doug was saying, you learn it by bouncing your ideas off of other people and co-teaching, then it's over here somewhere on the left. And I don't know about potential profitability, what to do with that. There you go, the picture. Saw that picture. Maybe you guys aren't as like wowed by it as I was. I thought it was pretty.
Well, what's interesting to me is where the colleague and I that are working on what we're working on, our lens's value is predicated on the idea of creation of value. And either you're creating and adding value in a process or not. And value in our universe isn't one-dimensional. Values actually comprise, knowledge value, social value, empathetic and spiritual value. We have about 8 or 9 different dimensions of value creation that are possible in any particular choice or action and or decision. And financial is one, but it's one. It's not the dominant and it's not the primary. And the purpose for shifting that field of play from a financial-centric industrial era only to a much broader lens is that there are lots of things that are hugely important and valuable that don't map to a financial expression but end up generative and productive of huge value to large numbers of people.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't get to that and you don't see that and recognize that until you take off the finance-centric, money-centric filter. As long as that's the only filter, then it becomes almost by definition, if that's part of your vernacular and setup, you're part of the old order. You're playing the past forward. You're not defining anew.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does kind of put a spin on things. The profitability certainly does, because that sounds like for profit. But on the other hand, just to be clear, like low profitability in that matrix doesn't mean like bad. Like Wikipedia is great, Yellowstone Park and stuff is great. The atmosphere is great. All of them are like low profitability because you can't bottle and sell them really. I mean, you can kind of bottle and sell national parks, but you can't bottle and sell air, at least not yet.
But that's exactly what begs the question, right? If you recognize there's this value, even though it doesn't necessarily equate to profit, why are you even applying a profitability filter? Why is that relevant? Like,
no, it's totally a spin. You're right. It is.
So the minute you do that, you actually contextualize the whole thing in an old finance-centric industrial era way.
Yeah.
You're in the box as opposed to outside of the box. It's the same thing. I looked at Sharma's whole construct and everything he's whipping up, right, which should be good for 3 to 5 years of fabulous profitability for him and his. But at the end of the day, I went through all of his new, construct stuff and forward-looking and innovation and future world and value creation, all this stuff, and then I got to like the project submenu on the website, and they were all like, venture capital plus social oriented. They were all like financial world centered in terms of investment in and capital application and all that stuff. And I'm like, if you're using those terms as your authoritative frame of reference and matrix, you just really undercut and contaminated the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, yeah, but I think that it's a social contagion. I think that has work cut out for her. I mean, this is like that 28 days later kind of thing. It's like how do you survive this world in which that contagion is rampant. So like, you just imagine like me when I went to Glasgow, I went to that cafe, the Project Cafe, and it's like nice cafe, good food, it's a social venture. Come on, guys, it's a good thing. So, but and even I was at the time, and I'm not saying I was wrong, but I was saying, oh yeah, if we start a co-op, that's okay because that means profit we get shared between those people who do the co-op. Well, I don't know what's good or bad, but you know, we sort of have this moral thing that like a little neighborhood social venture is better than Starbucks and better than Tesco's here in the UK or whatever. Is it? I don't know. I mean, I shop at Tesco's. Um, so so I don't know, but the real question to Paula, I guess, is like, given that this is all of it, there's a kind of a gravitational pull of doing everything as usual, even if we try to resist that. Like, um, what are you gonna? How do you proceed? What do you do? What goes next? Maybe it's not a good question. Sorry, that's not a very good question.
Or could
No,
you could you break out of the established frame of reference, or would you get booed out of the paper?
well, I think that what you said though is it helps me a lot because what I'm thinking is uh, try to put together these values. For example, what's about openness versus closeness, social or individual, critical or not critical, uh, autonomous versus non-autonomous, situated learning versus non-situated learning, knowledge as an individual process or as a social process. Um, so yeah, and technology. What approach they are using um, in the sense that if we are talking about technology mediated learning, then what does it mean to use open environments or free software versus using private software or commercial platforms? Mm, well, I have more questions than answers, so I'm trying to figure out how to put this together and make sense of it.
It sounds definitely like lots of challenges. Oh, one of the things Doug pointed out a while ago, and I think we're still at it, although I think it's a bit of a dilemma. Doug was saying, there's an open source mentality, like Peeragogy has an open source mentality, but here we are using a proprietary software platform for this conversation. So that's not really a contradiction. Of course, we might love to be using a nice open source software, and as they make Google less and less easy to use, maybe we just should. But I think that each of those versus things, I think you can be someplace in the middle, like with that box. You could be, like having a conversation towards generating open resources using a closed platform, for example. So you can be sort of in the middle. That reminds me, I got to email something to Charlie, or you could make something like Mac OS X, which is like has some open source software in it, but is itself proprietary. Or you could be like Linux, which is completely open source. I don't know. Um, that's just
Yeah,
my
but
own.
I think that yeah, of course we use proprietary or commercial platforms, but as you said, our intention is to, or at least our will, is to use as free platforms as possible, uh, or trying to use what is better for the group. So I think there's a greatest interest in that. I think our purpose is to open everything or to use free software or whatever, but sometimes, well, there are conditions that, of course,
Yeah, I
not
think
all.
what you said about best for the group, that's the key thing is like, you know, so if we were using something that like Karen couldn't get on at the library or something, that wouldn't be good. On the other hand, if we're using that someone who doesn't have a high bandwidth connection cannot get on, that's also not good because that limits people. However, we're mostly concerned about the people who are in the group right now, and like someone else will come, and then we can make some adjustments. But I think that has a lot to do with it. Is how many accommodations do we make to different people? So I think I'm behind on reaching out to everyone in the Eastern Hemisphere since I realized that in London I'm like halfway between the two hemispheres. I have this legacy way of thinking that I'm not in London and I'm in Minneapolis again. But I'm not. I know that now. I mean, I realize that. It's so similar here, but it's different at the same time. Um, so it would be good to reach out to those other people and bring them in and find out, hey, a different time of day. Would you want to use a different tool? We could use Skype instead of Hangouts. And in theory, we could have double the number of people, double the number of conversations, which I think would be good for the group as a whole. But I haven't done that because I have my own bandwidth limitations here. Um, so, but yeah, I thought that really reminds me of what you've talked about in the past about Eleanor Ostrom as well. Like, I think she would agree, like, do what's good for the group, and that ideological things like open could be bad for the group. You know, like if we spend all our time building software but never had any interesting conversations, that might not be very good. But Doug, a lot of that was kind of paraphrasing you, so if you want to re-sum up from a different perspective, go ahead.
It it's toward what end for what purpose, and ultimately, um, if it's not facilitative for the people involved in the doing of whatever it is they're doing, then that's sort of the real bottom line in acid test, right? And so much of the industrial model was about programming people not to do what was most in service to people, but to do what was most in service to productivity and profit and output. And that applied to learning processes and teaching and school and education as well. It was programming good little workers. They go in one door, they come out X years later with Y curriculum assimilated and Z test scores and performance criteria to be plugged into the factory floor or equivalent. And um, you know, the bottom line is human beings are a lot more variable. And what's facilitative for me is not at all facilitative for Paula, and what's facilitative for her is not at all facilitative for Karen. And each person has their own frame of reference and sort of aptitudinal pathways and machine and mechanisms to learn and to generate and produce in terms of what they're good at contributing to and what their contribution consists of. And it's not all about knowledge generation. Where you started, Paula, it's not about creating new, knowledge. It There's a huge percentage that has nothing to do with that. That has to do with knowledge applied, and that has to do with knowledge filtered, and that has to do with knowledge evolved, and that has to do with people working together independent of the subject matter that they're working on. Like, how do people learn how to play together? And there's a whole social layer and dimension that has nothing to do with the subject matter or mimetic, center of gravity of the endeavor. It has to do with social forms and metacognition, collective metacognition, how people work together, learn together, grow together, and all of the things related to that, that are everything from complex systems and AI on one hand through to social conventions and the whole field of of research into social interaction. How do people learn? How do people communicate? How do people share? Um, and what facilitates bringing out the best of everybody involved. But from a facilitative lens, not from a you have to conform in order to play.
So I want to just, I'm not going to describe it in detail, but I put a link in. I've sent it around. I think probably you got it on some discussion about the patterns. I just said this is a perfect example. It's I think we should all read it sometime. I want to reread it. It's an amazing essay by Ariyaratne, writing about a village that spent years literally grappling with a problem, which was in this case imposed by government. The government wasn't doing what they should, and the villagers knew it. And then this guy comes along and says, hey, wait a second, let's solve this another way. So he organized the people, and they just got together, and they solved the problem that they've been waiting years for in a weekend, because he got together, and some people like cooked some food, and like they got some shovels, and they dealt with it. So it's a really nice story because it has a happy ending. But I guess I feel like that same thing applies maybe applies at a different scale in education. That here we are, we're solving all these problems. You go kindergarten through high school, then another 4 years, and another 4 years. Then you go to work, and you go back to school for another 4 or 6 years. It's like it's a lot of time and energy put into something that what is the problem we're trying to solve? Where did it come from? I suppose it would be worth asking. Well, maybe we should close it down though, because it's already past the time. I know some people don't maybe have the same pressing agenda that they thought they had earlier today, but we've all got things we should get on with. So, any other closing remarks? Karen, silent remarks typed in. Anything?
Whispered from the library.
Whispered in. It's a nice sunny day there in Massachusetts. It's good. Paul, anything else new?
Well, thanks a lot, because you make me think.
Should be good. You got some time yet today to think some. But yeah, I told Doug I've been writing something really related about the social layer. People are obsessed with content, and I think maybe in education it's a bit different, but yeah, it's also, when it comes to content, they have like their own. They have a way of doing it too, and they think this way of doing it really works. But I think the thing is, like, they're confident in it, not because it's scientifically tested, but just because it's traditional. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, this is how we've always done it, or with minor changes, we've worn this path in the rock, and we can keep walking on the same path. And that's okay. But in terms of being critical doesn't necessarily mean being opposed to that. It just means like examining, like, yeah, well, if we walked on a different path, would it have different results? Let's try it, like once, let's just try it once or something. So I don't know. It sounds interesting. Good luck. If you wanna post it when you're ready. Even Spanish, English, we can pick our way through. Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely. If I finish it.
If you finish it, well, even if you don't finish it, it's a good time. If you don't finish it, we can finish it again later.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look at. I'd be interested in looking at it.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Well, if I don't finish it, we can work it together. That would.
There you go. There you go.
It'll get there. So, yeah, and it's interesting. I'm glad you're working on something, because like Charlie and I talked over the weekend, and we were both working on different things. So it'll be really exciting to see. Like we were both writing proposals, so keep it in mind. Like, you're trying to finish a paper, it's another level. But like, still, it'll be interesting to see if you talk about some similar stuff. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the broadcast. Bye-bye, broadcast.